The Supreme Court just dropped a massive 9-0 hammer that changes everything for gun owners in all 50 states. This unanimous ruling is the wake-up call that every American needs to hear right now because it rewrites the rules for your home and your property. If you think your front door is a solid shield against the government, you need to pay very close attention to this breaking update. This is not just some boring legal theory that only matters to lawyers in suits or people in Washington. It hits home for anyone who keeps a firearm for self-defense or values their privacy from police overreach. The justices just sent a message that nobody is talking about enough, and it could hit you during your next interaction with law enforcement. We are talking about the basic right to be left alone and the right to keep your tools for protection without fear of a sudden raid. This ruling changes the game for how the police can treat you and your family inside your own four walls starting today. If you care about your rights and want the truth without the media spin, hit that subscribe button right now to stay ahead of the curve. This massive shift comes from a case called Caniglia versus Strom, and the Supreme Court decided it with a perfect 9-0 vote. That means every single justice, from the most conservative to the most liberal, agreed that the government went way too far in this instance. The case started back in 2015, but the final ruling from the highest court in the land is what matters for us today. It all began with a heated argument between a husband and a wife that ended with a single firearm being placed on a table. The police were called for a wellness check, and they eventually convinced the husband to go to the hospital for a mental health evaluation. While he was gone, the officers went inside the home and seized his handguns without a warrant or his permission. They claimed they had the right to do this under something called the community caretaking exception, which is a legal loophole they've used for years. For a long time, the police argued that if they were just trying to keep people safe, they didn't need a warrant to enter a home. The Supreme Court just stepped in and said that line of thinking is completely wrong and dangerous for our constitutional freedom. Justice Clarence Thomas wrote the main opinion, and he made it very clear that the home is a sacred space under the Fourth Amendment. This amendment is the part of the Bill of Rights that protects you against unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. Before this ruling, many lower courts were letting the police use the caretaking rule to bypass your rights whenever they felt like it. Think of the Fourth Amendment like a high fence around your life that the government is not allowed to climb without a very good reason. The court basically said that while police can check on cars or public areas for safety, they cannot just walk into your living room. A warrant is a piece of paper signed by a judge that gives the police specific permission to search a certain place for a certain thing. Without that paper or a very narrow emergency, the justices ruled that the police must stay outside and respect your private property. This matters because it bridges the gap between your right to privacy and your Second Amendment right to actually own and keep those firearms. If the police could just use a safety check as an excuse to take your guns, your right to keep and bear arms wouldn't mean much. The court saw the danger in letting local officers decide on the fly when your constitutional rights should just disappear for the sake of a checkup. This was a huge win for every single person who believes that a man's home is his castle and should be treated that way. What do you think about the court standing together like this to protect the privacy of your home and your firearms from the government? Do you think the police should ever have the power to take a gun without a warrant if they claim it is for your own safety? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to like this video if you believe the Fourth Amendment is just as important as the Second. Your voice helps us show that people actually care about these high-stakes rulings that the mainstream media often ignores. Now that we understand the setup, we have to look at why this headline is only half of the story for gun owners. Many people saw the 9-0 score and thought the fight for our rights was over, but it is actually just moving to a new phase. This ruling stops the police from using one specific excuse to get into your house, but it doesn't stop every single tactic they use. You need to know exactly where the line is drawn so you don't accidentally give up your protections during a stressful encounter. The court was very careful to say that they weren't getting rid of all emergency entries, like if someone is screaming for help inside. But they did say that the simple job of being a helpful neighborly officer is not enough to toss the warrant requirement out the window. This is a massive victory because it prevents the government from turning every wellness check into a scavenger hunt for your personal property. It forces the authorities to follow the rules that the Founding Fathers put in place to prevent tyranny and random harassment. Here's what this means for you in the real world, whether you are a new owner or someone who has carried for years. Imagine you are having a bad day, or maybe a neighbor calls the police because they heard a loud argument coming from your house. Under the old way of doing things in some states, the police might have walked right in and taken your defense tools just to be safe. Now, thanks to this unanimous ruling, they generally cannot do that unless they have a warrant or there is an active, immediate, life-threatening emergency. Think of it like this. If your car is parked on the street and looks abandoned, the police can check it out and tow it to help the community. But your home is not a car on a public street, and the court says those two things should never be treated the same way. The justices reminded everyone that the Fourth Amendment was written specifically to protect the home from government intrusion above all other places. This creates a much stronger shield for you if you ever find yourself facing a knock at the door from local law enforcement. Let's look at a common scenario that could happen to any of us, like a routine traffic stop while you are carrying your sidearm lawfully. While this case was about a home, the logic the justices used strengthens the idea that the government needs a very clear reason to interfere. If the police want to take your property for safety, they now have a much harder time justifying it if they don't have a warrant. It reinforces the idea that your rights don't just vanish the moment an officer feels a little bit uneasy about a situation. This is where things get even more interesting for the future of gun rights across the entire country. This ruling is a rare moment of total agreement, which sends a shockwave through the lower courts that have been acting like activists. For years, some judges were looking for any excuse to let the police ignore the Bill of Rights when firearms were involved. This 9-0 decision tells those judges that they have to stop making up exceptions to the rules we all live by. The momentum is shifting, and there is a lot more to cover about how this affects red flag laws and state-level power grabs. If you feel like the walls are closing in on our freedoms, you need to stick around because the next part explains a hidden consequence. There is a bigger fight coming to your state capital, and I want to make sure you are ready for it before it hits your doorstep. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss the deep dive into how states are already trying to bypass this ruling. We have to talk about the real-world impact on ordinary people who just want to be left alone to live their lives in peace. Let's say you live in a state with very strict gun laws, where the authorities are always looking for a reason to confiscate firearms. This Supreme Court decision acts like a giant stop sign for those officials who want to use safety as a weapon against legal owners. It means they can't just use a tip from a disgruntled relative to walk into your house and clear out your safe. One of the best ways to think about this is by looking at a scenario involving a simple mistake or a misunderstanding with a neighbor. Maybe you are cleaning your gear and someone sees it through a window and calls the police because they are scared of guns. Before this ruling, the police might have used that call as a community caretaking reason to enter and seize your collection without a warrant. Now, they have to respect the fact that owning a legal item in your own home is not an emergency that justifies breaking the law. Another scenario involves the growing trend of red flag laws, which are being pushed in dozens of states right now. These laws often allow the government to take guns first and ask questions later, sometimes without the owner even knowing a hearing happened. While this ruling didn't strike down red flag laws entirely, it makes it much harder for them to be carried out inside a home without a warrant. It adds a layer of protection that was being stripped away by politicians who think the Second Amendment is a second-class right. You have to remember that the Fourth Amendment and the Second Amendment work together like a team to protect your total freedom. If you have the right to own a gun but no right to keep the police out of your house, you don't really have a right at all. This unanimous decision is the court saying that you cannot have one without the other, and the government must respect both. It's about dignity and the fact that you are a citizen with rights, not a subject who lives at the mercy of an officer's mood. This ruling also helps people who might be struggling with mental health but don't want to lose their rights forever because they asked for help. If people are afraid that calling for a wellness check means the police will raid their house and take their property, they won't seek help. By protecting the home, the court is actually making it safer for people to deal with personal issues without fearing a government crackdown. It restores a bit of trust that has been broken over the last few decades as the government got more and more intrusive. We also need to look at how this affects the way police are trained across all 50 states from the big cities to the small towns. Every police department in America now has to update their manuals to reflect that they cannot use caretaking as a key to your front door. This means that if an officer does break these rules, any evidence they find or any guns they take might have to be returned immediately. It gives you a legal leg to stand on in court if your rights are ever violated by someone wearing a badge. The part that most people are missing is how this decision might influence the next few years of Second Amendment lawsuits in the lower courts. When the Supreme Court speaks with one voice like this, it creates a massive precedent that is very hard for anti-gun politicians to ignore. A precedent is just a legal rule that all the other courts have to follow once the highest court makes a final decision. This 9-0 vote is one of the strongest precedents we have seen in a long time for the protection of the American home. This is where the next big fight starts, because we know that some states will try to find a way around this ruling almost immediately. They might try to pass new laws that define emergencies in a very broad way to keep giving the police a backdoor into your private life. We have to stay alert and watch how the governors and state legislatures react to this unanimous defeat of their overreach. The battle for the Bill of Rights is a marathon, and this ruling is a massive burst of energy for our side of the fence. There are a lot of myths floating around the internet about what this case actually does and what it doesn't do for your daily life. One big myth is that the police can never enter your home without a warrant now, but that is simply not true and could get you in trouble. If there is an active fire, or if someone is inside chasing you with a knife, the police can still enter to save a life. The court only stopped them from entering for non-emergency safety checks that are just a regular part of their daily routine. Another myth is that this ruling only matters if you have a lot of expensive firearms or a massive collection in your basement. In reality, this protects the person who has one old shotgun for home defense just as much as it protects the person with 50 modern rifles. The Constitution doesn't care how much your property is worth or how many items you own. It only cares that they belong to you. This is a win for every single American, regardless of their background, their wealth, or where they choose to live. A third myth is that this ruling only applies to certain states or only to people who have a concealed carry permit in their wallet. Because this was a Supreme Court decision on a federal constitutional right, it applies to every single inch of the United States. It doesn't matter if you live in a very blue state or a very red state, the police in your town must follow this rule. Your rights don't stop at the state line, and the justices made sure that this protection is universal for every citizen of this country. We also hear people saying that this ruling makes it impossible for police to do their jobs or keep the community safe from harm. That is a scare tactic used by people who want the government to have unlimited power over your private life and property. The police did their jobs for over 100 years without this caretaking loophole, and they can certainly do it now by just getting a warrant. It just means they have to do a little more work and prove to a judge that there is a real reason to intrude. It is so important to correct these bad takes, because following the wrong legal advice can lead to a felony charge and the loss of your rights forever. You should always be polite and stay calm if the police come to your door, but you should also know that you have the right to say no. If they don't have a warrant and there isn't a true life or death emergency, you can tell them you do not consent to a search. Knowing this ruling gives you the confidence to stand up for yourself without being aggressive or breaking any laws. Think about how much more secure you feel knowing that the highest court in the land just stood up for your privacy and your firearms. It's a reminder that even when things feel divided, there are still some basic American principles that everyone can agree on. The idea that your home is your own space and the government needs a very good reason to enter is one of those core values. This ruling is a victory for common sense and a major defeat for anyone who wants to treat gun owners like second-class citizens. The big takeaway from all of this is that the legal landscape for gun rights is changing faster than most people can keep up with today. We are seeing a new era where the courts are finally starting to look at the original meaning of the Constitution again. This 9-0 win is a sign that the tide is turning in favor of the individual person and away from the massive power of the state. It gives us hope that other unconstitutional laws will be struck down in the near future as more cases reach the justices. As we wrap this up, remember that the Supreme Court just gave you a massive shield for your home and your right to bear arms. They stopped the police from using the excuse of being a helpful neighbor to search your house and seize your property without a warrant. This ruling is a unanimous win for all 50 states and protects every gun owner from Hawaii to Maine and everywhere in between. It reinforces the fact that your home is a sacred space that the government cannot enter just because they feel like it. This matters because it keeps the power in your hands and ensures that your self-defense tools stay where they belong, with you. We've seen how this ruling impacts traffic stops, wellness checks, and the future of red flag laws that are popping up everywhere. It's about protecting your family, your dignity, and your ability to stay safe in an uncertain world without the government breathing down your neck. Understanding these rules is the first step in being a responsible and prepared citizen who knows how to handle any situation. Being part of this community means staying ready and being the most informed person in the room when the topic of rights comes up. If you want to keep getting these critical updates and stay one step ahead of the people trying to take your freedoms, make sure you are subscribed. Leave a comment below with the word freedom if you think this 9-0 ruling was the right move for America. We are all in this together, and staying informed is the best way to make sure our rights are never taken away.